Hey, Vinyl Community, Jeff back again. Time to do another one of my 10 great albums from certain years. I started this a long time ago. I revisit it periodically as I remember to do so. Started in 77 because that was really kind of the early days of my music journey, and have progressed now through 2002. As mentioned in the previous recent videos, it's gotten a little harder because obviously vinyl was not being really produced in the later 90s and 2000s. So it was figures a little more slim pickings to have things. But however, obviously in recent years, a ton of stuff has been reissued, and a lot of the material that came out in that time period is now available on vinyl. So it did make it a lot easier to go back and look at things that I was listening to at that time frame, and now they're on vinyl. So was able to get that done. So fortunately, there's quite a bit to choose from now. Actually, if I think back, at the time I started this series a while back, a couple of years ago, a lot of these albums that I'm showing today probably were not available on vinyl. I am sticking to showing just vinyl. I mean, obviously I can pull CDs out easy, but they probably weren't available on vinyl back then. So I probably would not have been able to do this year. So 2002, what was Jeff listening to? What is some of his favorite albums? And these aren't really ranked, they're not in order, they're not necessarily favorites, they're just 10 great albums that I happen to have on vinyl. I think when I look back, I probably only had about 11 or 12 to choose from. So this is almost everything from the year 2002 that was released in 2002 that I have on vinyl. So let's get into this. They're in no particular order. Initially they were kind of alphabetical, but then I kind of jumped around as I remembered other ones. The very first Demon Hunter album. At the time this came out, there was a big hype about them. Of course, they were a metalcore band, which was becoming very popular at that time frame. And they were, in the Christian realm, one of the more extreme bands that was coming out of, that new wave of metalcore stuff that was appearing in the Christian metal market. And I wasn't sure exactly my stance on them. I heard clips. You don't hear as much because we didn't have all the different streaming services, but I heard some stuff and I'm like, they're a little extreme, more than I kind of like. I think it was a little later, maybe I did pick it up at the time, and then it was kind of like, yeah, they're pretty good. But then when their second album hit, I was sold. And I don't know, there was a slight difference in production, slight difference in the songwriting style, just slightly, which made me then go back and revisit the first one and realize that I had fallen in love. I was starting to get a little more of an extreme ear there. So yeah, this one just got reissued on vinyl real recently, like I said, probably in the past year, which was exciting. They have been going back and reissuing the early Demon Hunter catalog, and I think we have pretty much everything now, I'm thinking. Anyway, great stuff there. A band at the time I'd heard a lot about, never paid much attention to, Disturbed. This is their second album. Believe I knew a little about them. Wasn't sure what to make of them. I really was intrigued by their sound and their vocals. I was a little concerned about the lyrical content because of just looking at the imagery. I didn't really pay much attention to them. They just seemed like they gave off a vibe of being a little more explicit and stuff. So I kind of didn't pay a whole lot of attention to them. I wasn't really getting into that kind of stuff. But in recent years, I've been going back and revisiting their stuff, and I really love his vocal style. I love their, they're just easy to listen to, but yet very, heavy. So I know back in the days, it was just, you find a lot of bands, either you're getting out of that 90s alt phase, which I really hated, the grunge and the alternate stuff. Really just didn't like that in the day. So in the early 2000s, we're starting to see some of these bands that I kind of was trying to lump in with that, but then I realized, no, these guys are definitely a different breed, and a lot of bands were, that I'm finding nowadays that I'm going back, Korn and bands like that I kind of just blocked out at the time, just because I was like, I just don't like modern music. But yeah, so I really appreciate this. I recently picked up their first album. I have this, but and then I have one of their newer albums that I found on sale. So yeah, great stuff though. Appreciate their work. All right, Long Way Home by Dokken. These are those years where they kind of got forgot about. This album is following a string of albums where I thought I feel like Dokken was returning. I mean, we got some of the latter stuff like Dysfunctional and Shadow Life and stuff like that, which they were tinkering with the sound. But then George kind of left. They brought in like Rev Beach. They started doing things. Erase the Slate to me was like a return to form. It was one of my favorite albums. And this is like the third album after that. So they kind of were still in that line of, I think that they were really sounding good. They were really doing some solid material. So some great stuff. Just, you know, some of the stuff that before it was kind of shaky. It depends on your feeling on that. So love that one though. 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, Dream Theater. I've been a big Dream Theater fan prior to this. For some reason, this album still resonates with me as being very good. I just at the time I listened to this so much. I just love this. It's a double record set. There's a theme at times. It's just to me one of their greater albums. But you know, I say that about a lot of their albums, but this one really stood out as being just one of their greats in my mind, and I just listen to it, still revisit it quite often. It's still one of my favorite albums. So great stuff from Dream Theater there in 2002. Crimson Thunder by Hammerfall. I showed this not too long ago because I picked it up. This is the 20th year anniversary edition. It came with the comic and everything. Big Hammerfall fan. This is like their 4th album. And so, yeah, I discovered them with their first album. One of those bands I bought solely because of the cover artwork. I love knights. I love Templar type stuff. Knights, dragons, things like that. So I bought their first album simply based on the cover art. Fell in love with them. You know, just Euro metal, power metal, great stuff. The thing I liked about them more than a lot of the power metal bands, to me, power metal, it depends, you know, it gets kind of repetitive and boring. It's just like every song is constant double bass on the drums, just the whole time with very little dynamics. Hammerfall didn't do that. They do it occasionally, but they don't sound like that where every song begins to sound the same. From a drummer standpoint, as a drummer, I'm listening to them like they're just doing the same thing. So I got bored with a lot of that stuff, but Hammerfall was one that never seemed to bore me. You know, they just always right in that sweet spot of melodic and heavy, and yet, you know, some great stuff in there. Killing the Dragon by Dio. Now, admittedly, the few albums prior to this, decent stuff by Dio, Strange Highways, Magica, some of those albums in that time frame were a little off the beaten path for Dio. But when he hit Killing the Dragon, I think this was a true return to form. This and Master of the Moon, it just seemed like he kind of came back out of that odd phase where the music was a little, I love those albums, but they were different musically and everything. And this to me was a return to form. Just absolutely, when I heard this album, I'm like, wow, Dio's back. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. All right, P.O.D. Satellite. Now, I was a P.O.D. fan from Record 2 way back in the day. I picked up on them early in the days, but this album, while their Southtown album prior to this kind of got a little, you know, they had songs on videos and they started getting a little bit of, you know, traction. This album, I think, put them over the top. Lots of videos from this one. Boom, Youth of a Nation, Alive. You know, they had quite a few bigger hits from this album, and I think, you know, they started making it on soundtracks, the Matrix soundtrack, the Little Nicky soundtrack. They had all kinds of, you know, they were starting to really get traction. And so this is still really a pivotal album. One of my favorites, got some of their biggest hits on it of the day. And, you know, absolutely love this and have loved their stuff ever since. Mortification, Relentless. Mortification, Christian metal, early grindcore. They change styles about every other album. So people have favorite albums based on their styles. I prefer the more thrash, the vocals that are more palatable. But I love all their stuff for different reasons. This is one of my, it just to me sounds like classic thrash. You can understand the vocals. The riffs are just there. And there's quite a few albums they've done like that. This is one that stands out. There's a couple albums in the same time frame that are just absolutely phenomenal. Brain Cleaner and there's a lot of them, even the heavier ones that I really like. It's just some of the vocal styles not as favorable to as when he sings like this. So still one of my favorite albums by them. They have a huge collection, so I'm so glad that all of them have been reissued on vinyl in the past couple years, and I was able to keep up with them. Love that album. This is a fun one, Rising Out of the Ashes by Warlord. Warlord put out like an EP, it was 83-ish, 84-ish. They put out a full album in the Cans of Destruction, and then they were gone. And they were just this mythical, being fake names, you know, Damien and people, you know, had this whole stage show, had video production of the stage show, very interesting epic song styles, very just, I love them back in the day, and then they disappeared, gone. 2002, boom, Rising Out of the Ashes. They come back, or at least Bill, the guitar player, the main guy behind it, Mark Zonder on drums, he returns, and they got in Joachim Cans from Hammerfall to do vocals. So, Warlord with a twist, different sound, Hammerfallish with a different music style. I was just thrilled because not only was I a big fan of Hammerfall, I'm like, that's very cool, but I'm a big fan of Warlord. They're back. But it is a different album, you know, it's different. Now, this was kind of it for a while, and then again we saw them come back a handful of years later, and they have put out quite a few albums, even in the past 10 years. Bill is gone now. He passed away, what, 2-3 years ago. And but they have continued to put out material that he had recorded, that, you know, they finished up, and they have a new album that just dropped that I'm waiting for it to come out on vinyl. It just dropped digitally, and it has some stuff that Bill played on that they finished up, but you know, and some remakes of some songs. So yeah, I've been a big Warlord fan. I love the whole idea behind them, and so I'm always interested, and I have picked up all the vinyl reissues that High Roller Records has done, so that's been great stuff too. Last one, number 10, is Star One. Star One. This is the first Star One album by Arjen Anthony Lucassen. He's also the guy behind Arion. He's done a lot of other stuff too. But back in the day, this was cool when it first came out. I remember I'm like, cool, this is interesting because every song on here is based on some science fiction movie, Star Wars, just Dune, things like that. And he's done 3 albums like that. This was the first one though, and I remember back in the day just loving this album when it first came out. Used to listen to it. I have the deluxe CD box edition or whatever, weird case edition that's got extra stuff, and it was just kind of cool because a big science fiction fan, was kind of neat to listen to the interpretations of the songs and say, oh, he must be talking about this movie, stuff like that. So was grateful that they put these out not too long ago on vinyl, all 3 of them, and I was able to grab them. So there you go, great stuff. Star One, just fun, you know, power type metal, melodic, dramatic, great stuff. Anyway, that's it. Just 10 great albums that I happen to have on vinyl. They came out in 2002, and I'll be back later with the 2003 one day. Till then, see you later. Rock on and rock hard.